Hello, I am Nancy Fox Edele, and I'm going to talk about the ways that online forums can serve as high impact practices by creating community in our classes. My presentation is a visual study of ways that really we can listen to students in our online forums and think about what they are telling us. I think that no matter the technological tools or the platforms that deliver our online classes, and there are many, the one constant that connects our teaching endeavors from the first schools of the Sophist and Isocrates to now is our relationship with our students. But students can often feel remote and alienated in online settings, and they will tell us this if we ask them. The key practice in this inquiry is the weekly discussion forum, both classic, academic, and innovative, that invites both students and the teacher to engage in interesting and human ways, as my student Darla explained it, with one another. My intent in this brief talk is to provide a few new tools to apply and develop ways that online forums can, as George DQ, who's the guru of high impact practices, can deepen learning and change the way that students think and act. And that's how he describes the impact of effective practices. Second, I'm hoping to provide a few proven methods and student insight, because that's my key point and my discovery and what I respect the most in this research, to provide that student insight and to help implement these forums across curricula. And then finally, to foster student engagement in online instruction, because as one of the students in this project has said multiple times, that this could be the beginning of a new normal. So how is that a good thing? I'd like to start with some theoretical inspirations, not only for this particular project, but also for my own teaching. The first is from Isocrates, one of the first teachers to actually write down his ideas in a way that it has been saved for us. We ought to think of the art of discourse as the source of most of our blessings, language, the material aspects of our communications in our lives, how we rhetorically deliver our messages, who we are to one another. And he says we've come together and founded cities and made laws, invented arts as a result of our discourse, and there's no institution devised by man at that time, and men and women, which the power of speech has not helped us to establish. And then, of course, our own contemporary scholar, Bell Hooks, says constantly, speak and claim the power of your voice. I also am always inspired by Pippa Stein, the late pedagogical scholar here in the United States. This particular quote, I think, is powerful. The classrooms have the potential to become transformative sites in which students' representational resources can be used productively and critically. And finally, there's this wonderful line in Mrs. Maisel, which is an Amazon series, the teaching is an act of generosity. Education, I think, is at its best an enterprise that can be called rhetorical. Since the times and the forums of the first known teachers, the Sophists in Greece and Italy and Asia Minor, and the griots in Africa, our pedagogies have been shaped to the purposes of our eras, what Martin Luther King Jr. calls the fierce urgency of now. So there's a kairos to our teaching. From these early teachers, we've learned to suit our purposes to the geographies and the interests and the needs, really, of our students, our audiences. And we find ourselves now adapting to a teaching space, and it's not much older than most of the students who inhabit it and travel within it, and that's the virtual classroom. In its first iteration, this online experience was characterized, you might know, by the words "alone together" by Sherry Turkle, who is an MIT scholar of our lives on the screen. Certainly, much of the immediate reaction and critique in the time of COVID has decried the lack of physical contact. We hear this all the time. Lack of the shared classrooms and the dorms and the quads of our university traditions, as well as an imagined and a feared loss of educational integrity. Once again, our chronicles are evoking the specter of a lost generation, as if the social distancing we're experiencing, albeit radical, dooms our students as surely as the virus from which we shield them could. And I think some teachers have reinforced feelings of anger, grief, and loss. And that hasn't seemed to abate or alter after a year of our move to the virtual. I'm arguing here that this dismay and this sense of an arrested progress, however understandable it is, are premature and unnecessary. It's been a fact since our earliest schools that education is a field both cultivated and sustained by change, which paradoxically may be our one true tradition. Now, in the words of my student Peyton, we may in our online classes be defining the beginning of a new normal that gives everyone a voice. And the online forum is a seemingly common, but I think a potentially transformative practice in distance learning, and one that has been insufficiently documented. It's my contention, indeed it's my discovery from my students' work, that these meetings and the discussions they engender not only serve as helpful activities in this emergency, but they also, I think, portend a creative and a meaningful development in our invention and our delivery of a cohesive curriculum. Our students' engagement gives this work its integrity and its reason. It's they who create this pedagogy, I contend, as they engage in it and who forge this new path in our ancient field as they walk it. Given the impact of COVID-19 on classroom teaching, I'm going to offer some informed and specific recommendations to implement a high-impact practice of the forums across the curriculum. I'm going to briefly document and explore structured reflections of my students through their eyes and their voices as they engage in inquiry and build community in online settings. While the literature in high-impact practices is replete with analyses and applications, there's a gap in the study of online writing instruction. And there are virtually no answers to the question, what do students actually say about these experiences? How do they describe the impact on them? So here we're looking at online forums through the structured reflections of 350 students in my own online writing classes from last spring until now, again, through their voices and through their eyes. My argument here is based entirely on a serendipitous discovery within student forums since the online forums began in the spring 2020 term and continue 3 to 4 semesters later. My basic method, is called grounded theory, which is a productive method of data analysis, and allows the study participants to speak without imposing a pre-existing theoretical stance. My own site of investigation is a rhetoric class in a large urban public university, and the material consists of student comment and descriptive research. I focus here on 2 discrete weekly forums. One is classic and academic, and the other is innovative, that define this pedagogy as together we create it. George Q. identified specific practices in 2008 that profoundly impact student engagement in ways that address our most underserved students and affect students' desire to stay in school, and stay committed. And the most significant contribution of this study to Agile teaching and learning here is that these high-impact practices are defined, embodied, and promoted by the students themselves. One of my students, Jackie, said if we can make these connections, we can make a difference in our lives and the lives of others. And as a result, this study can also provide educators with student insight and proven methods for improvement in online instruction, particularly for those vulnerable student populations. We'll offer informed and specific recommendations, including a few forum assignments, to implement and develop this high-impact practice both during and beyond the COVID experience. As my student Emily notes in the title of this presentation, the class is not just a class, it's a community. Surprisingly, one of the measures often overlooked in the studies of impacts and metrics here is the response of students. And that's the reason for this field of research in the first place. The literature of high-impact practices is no exception to this custom. It's focused on administrative and academic assessment of student achievement, of specific outcomes in this list of formalized activities. What is unique here is that students aren't the objects of the study. They are the story. Some of the literature works with forums in STEM courses and in history, and there's only one from the student's point of view. But the forums are rich in experience for them, for our students, and information for us. Forums do rise to the level of high-impact practices that, since their entry onto the academic scene in 2007-2008, have served to define the most effective means of fostering engagement and retention of our students. An online forum can be viewed as a way of deepening an existing high-impact practice, such as intensive writing, or given the way that a forum contains within its praxis several existing high-impact practices and redefines them, can be a new experience altogether. Students themselves signal the deepest impact of their forum work. In preliminary discussions, they cite discovery of differences, appreciation of diversity, improving communication, achieving leadership, overcoming shyness and loneliness, finding acceptance, developing critical thinking, working on deep intellectual and personal levels, among other results. In line with our foundational principle of education for democratic citizenship, we can document findings that students in forums discover and practice the art of civil discourse, including disagreement. Specific practices active in the online forums, according to Q, can be summarized, in my view, into the two categories of critical thinking and building community. The forums offer compelling evidence of the need to research more formally the impact and the potential of these two essential features that connect all high-impact practices as a mission and an effect, and that is, again, the values of inquiry and community. We learn along with our students here as they and we conduct these expeditions together. For this reason, to me, the values of inquiry and community seem the tensile strength that bonds all high-impact practices, whether they be the initial 8 defined activities in 2007, 2008, 10 in 2013, or the current 11 and counting. They are, I think, what we ourselves aspire to accomplish, what we valorize and do as teachers, and often why we entered this profession in the first place. And the literature of high-impact practices reminds us of those purposes and channels them into specific class activities that are replete with intellectual and personal effect. They are, as originally posited, intended to deepen learning and change the way students think and act. For example, as practices in 21st century pedagogy and science, they, quote, engage students through open-ended inquiry, compelling real-world questions, and data-rich experiences, which is, I think, a definition of process that's no different whether the inquiry be in a college science education or a college composition class on a University Parkway in any of our own towns. Q also articulated a deep and integrative learning scale, and the online forums can involve all of these elements. Students express awareness, too, without being prompted, and in these same words, that they're engaged in these processes and changed by them. In writing classes where online forums discussed in this proposal were first observed, a student comments unbidden address these points as fact. Quote, "We are writing and researching deep subjects," which is a comment that aligns with all the research in high-impact practices that emphasizes deep learning and engagement and deep approaches to learning. The students also say, quote, "I've gained so much," end quote. Another student, "Students put their heart into their writing." And perhaps most important this time of COVID, a student said, "It has helped me feel less lonely." There's also, interestingly, an awareness of transfer. Students talk about the writer we can still become. Quote, "It prepares me for the future." Weekly academic forums are an opportunity to teach writing as an art and a craft. A semester-long forum can constitute or be constituted by the story of a given course or a shared community experience. It's important to note that highly strategic approaches to query design evoke the kind of insightful response that you might want. Moreover, the strategies serve as the sole purpose and primary content of most studies of online forums in general, and high-impact online writing in particular. These kinds of studies are important as both pedagogical theory that is student-centered and practice that proves the effectiveness of this direction. While some approaches are firmly constrained in terms of categories, like a forum considered formal or informal, for example, most approaches are designed to elicit thinking and the shared intellectual activity. They also serve to teach and assess for specific technical requirements in short and easily managed forum papers that can be scaffolded as a sequence in the course. For example, the use of evidence and proper citation, that is, what do you know and how do you know it, and other curricular interests. These examples of online forums show how they work on both academic and experiential levels. Academic are numbers 1 and 3, experiential are numbers 2 and 4. One forum, number 2, is indeed student created, and then you see also students' own assessment of their engagement listed here beneath the prompt. In number 2, Whitney's forum, students wrote at a greater length than in any other forum. In fact, they composed small memoirs that speak for their experience now, or could be the start of a longer work that they pursue as they go along. It was the most successful forum, even more successful than mine, I have to say. It was an amazingly successful forum. And number 4, the open-ended discussions of experiences. They were amazing, from the nurse on the COVID ward who's a single parent worrying about carrying the virus home to her baby after her midnight shift, to the active duty student who wrote there that, quote, "We read about things like this in history books," unquote. Students not only want to tell their stories, but also they are eager to read and respond to others. Here's an example of an introductory prompt that sets the scene and the atmosphere for discussions to come. It is graded, so you can set up as much rigor as you like in this prompt. This is the start of my course, which consists almost entirely of online forum discussion and papers and so on. So mine starts at this level. Hello, how are you? Who are you? We're going to be living together for the next couple of months. And then they grow sequentially as the students acquire skill and facility in writing. You see here are courtesy and interest and interaction in these posts. And that's a hallmark of our students' forums. It enables them to discuss difficult topics without the invective that we often see in our public discourse, which they really dislike. And in fact, when asked what kind of community they wanted to build online together, they all spoke of respect, equality, and cooperation. This is a partial list of the changes and the gains that they see in themselves as a result of their online forums. It is no small matter that the students who describe themselves as shy or silent in face-to-face classes can write volumes here. And the one that particularly struck me was the statement, it's from Alnika, one of my students, it's like a stone was lifted, because her sentiment here, her response here, has been repeated time and again by her colleagues in the forums. I argue that the information and the insight are available in the stories of students themselves, as evinced in this statement from C. We can read this post and in its small frame discover worlds of information. And in that lies the impetus for this study, to see their online communications with one another through their eyes. And actually, like the designer of high-impact practices himself, listen to students' accounts of their own experience in their own words. In 1993, George Q. actually conducted a qualitative study where he did just this, and he listened to what students had to say about their own experience. Here is Julio talking about the impact on him and on the community of which he is a part. The research that I'm doing here was in my writing classes on the 1,000 and 3,000 level, so both beginning and advanced. However, my contention is that forums that originate in writing-intensive courses have a practical application across the curriculum. And that conviction is supported by the scholarship. There are forums and there are writings about forums in history, religion, philosophy, engineering, and science. As teachers, I think that we can often teach from a fixed seat on, say, a knowledge podium, reading a script, or a theoretical model from a canon of texts. And I think we've probably all been guilty of that kind of teaching. I know I certainly have. I've been teaching for a long time, and I know that at different times in my career I've done just that. But here I'm arguing for an inquiry that engages students on the deepest level in the act of defining the pedagogy itself, not just as scribblers in an assignment book, right, or an obedient paper writer, I think what Michel Foucault calls the docile body, who are conscious only of their grade. Here I want to recognize them as a catalyst to action, pushing beyond the customary strictures and structures, because that's how this inquiry and its community, its collaborative community, came to be. It started with a post like this particular reflection here. Given the curricular turn in the time of COVID and larger pedagogical shifts online, a focus on the practices of online forums seems both necessary and promising. Bridget Burns, who is the leader of the University Innovation Alliance here in the United States, and her brief is to study student completion rates. She has noted and emphasized the need for cultivation of what she calls deeper learning experiences to attain our goals in this respect. She talks about a dearth of, quote, literature contributing to greater understanding of student success in higher education. And she calls for, quote, potential solutions implemented at campuses across the country, we might say the globe. I'm suggesting that this preliminary study of online forums would begin to fill a gap in the literature of both high-impact practices and online instruction. But what it would do is add our students' voices to the academic and the public discussion in this emergent field. Perhaps the most compelling reason for pursuing this study is found again in Peyton's insight at the start of this session, that online classes are the new normal in university education. It may be that what Peyton says is true. And if so, based on what my students have reported so far, that is very good news for our pedagogy and for our profession. If you would like to review the presentation or hear more about this data and this study, here's my email. Listed here are my endnotes. And here is my bibliography. I want to thank you so much for your visit and for your patience in listening to my talk with my aviary of finches singing counterpoint along with me as I was delivering my information. And I hope to hear from you. Thank you again.